I recently had to experience something that ripped my world apart in less than 10 minutes. My 8-year-old daughter, my sunshine, my reason for breathing, was shaved by a school cop. Her beautiful braids, the ones she'd sat hours for, the ones she said made her feel close to her late mother, gone. Hacked away by a man with a badge and a razor in a janitor's closet because he claimed her hair was a distraction. No warning, no phone call, just humiliation. Her sobs were muffled under the buzz of clippers. When I walked into that nurse's office and saw her shaking under a borrowed hoodie, patches of blood still visible on her scalp, I stopped being a civilian, and they didn't know who I was. But I'm not just Carla's father, I'm Ghost Hammer, the deadliest Delta Force commander you've never heard of. 27 years of black ops, now aimed at one arrogant cop and every coward who shielded him. They left scars on my daughter. I left a legacy in war zones. And I'm about to show them how I handle threats. But let's start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where in the world you're listening from today. The axe bit deep into the oak round, splitting it clean down the middle with a satisfying crack. I set up another log, feeling the familiar burn in my shoulders as I raised the axe again. The morning air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of fresh-cut wood and pine needles. Out here, behind my cabin, with nothing but trees and silence for company, this was the retirement I'd dreamed of during those long, dark missions. After 27 years as Ghost Hammer, Delta Force's most decorated commander, I'd traded tactical gear for flannel shirts and combat zones for these peaceful Virginia mountains. The only battle plan I needed these days was figuring out what to make Carla for dinner. My little girl, 8 years old in the center of my universe. Never thought I'd be a single dad, especially not after losing Maria before we could even start our family. But then came Carla, this tiny, perfect baby who needed a home, and suddenly I had purpose again. Worth more to me than all those classified missions and medals locked away in my footlocker. I buried the axe in the chopping block and checked my watch. 10:47 a.m. Carla would be in her science class now, probably raising her hand for every question. That kid soaked up knowledge like a sponge, smart as a whip and twice as quick. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unusual. Not many people had this number. "Cross," I answered, wiping sweat from my brow. "Mr. Cross, this is Nurse Patterson from Ridgeline Elementary." Her voice was clinical, detached. Something in her tone made the hairs on my neck stand up. The same warning system that had kept me alive in places I'm still not allowed to name. "Is Carla all right?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "Your daughter has been detained in my office for a dress code violation. Deputy Clay is handling the situation. You need to come immediately." Deputy Clay, the school resource officer. Something cold settled in my gut. Detained? She's 8 years old. What kind of violation? "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, Mr. Cross. Deputy Clay insists you come in person." "Let me speak to my daughter," I demanded, already moving toward the cabin. "That won't be possible at this time. Please arrive within the hour." The line went dead. 20 years of combat discipline was all that kept me from hurling the phone against a tree. I took one deep breath, then another, forcing my mind to shift into operational mode. Assess, plan, execute. Inside the cabin, I changed my sweaty shirt and grabbed my keys, my mind racing through possibilities. Dress code violation? Carla wore the same simple uniform as every other kid. The only thing different about her was her hair. The braided extensions we'd gotten last weekend at the black-owned salon 2 towns over. Carla had been so excited, sitting still for hours as the stylist worked, beaming at her reflection afterward. "I look like mommy now," she'd said, pointing to the photo of Maria I'd shown her. The drive to Ridgeline Elementary usually took 20 minutes. I made it in 12, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The school was a low, brick building surrounded by carefully manicured lawns and American flags. I'd always found it strangely sterile. As I parked, I forced myself to breathe, to think. This wasn't a hostage situation in some foreign territory. This was a school. Carla needed me calm, not charging in like I was breaching an enemy compound. But every instinct I had was screaming, The front office receptionist looked up as I entered, her eyes widening slightly. I get that a lot. 6'3", black, and built like I could tear a phone book in half tends to make an impression in this predominantly white county. I'm Elijah Cross. I'm here for my daughter, Carla. Oh. She reached for her phone. I'll let Nurse Patterson know you're here. The nurse appeared moments later, a thin woman with pinched features and a clipboard held like a shield. Mr. Cross, thank you for coming promptly. If you'll follow me. As we walked down the empty hallway, the squeak of her orthopedic shoes echoing against the lockers, my dread deepened. What exactly is going on? I kept my voice level, controlled. Deputy Clay can explain everything. Another non-answer. We turned a corner and there was the nurse's office. Through the window in the door, I could see my little girl sitting in a plastic chair, her head down, shoulders hunched. Something had been done to her hair. It looked wrong, uneven. The sight hit me like a physical blow. My vision narrowed, and for a split second, the hallway transformed into a target acquisition zone. I forced the tactical response down, locked it away. Nurse Patterson opened the door. Deputy Clay, Mr. Cross is here. The man who turned to face me wore the beige uniform of the county sheriff's department, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Deputy Darren Clay, mid-40s, clean cut, with the practiced smile of someone used to being respected without earning it. I'd seen his type before in every theater of war, men who mistake a uniform for character. But all that registered peripherally. My focus was entirely on Carla, who looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Her beautiful braids, the ones she'd sat so patiently for, the ones that had made her feel connected to the mother she'd never known, had been hacked at. Sections cut away haphazardly, leaving a jagged, uneven mess. "Daddy," she whispered, and the sound broke something open inside me. I crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her, gently taking her small hands in mine. "I'm here, baby," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm right here." I wanted to hold my daughter, but before I could, Deputy Clay's hand landed on my shoulder. I felt each finger like a burning brand. "Mr. Cross," he said, his voice carrying that false authority men like him mistake for respect. "We need to discuss your daughter's violation of school policy." I kept my eyes on Carla. "What happened to your hair, baby?" Clay's grip tightened. "Sir, I need to explain the situation first." I shrugged his hand off with a controlled movement. 20 years of combat had taught me exactly how much force to use. Enough to make a point, not enough to give him an excuse. "I'm talking to my daughter." Carla's eyes darted between me and Clay, that look I knew too well. A civilian caught between combatants, calculating risk. No child should have that look, especially not mine. "It's against the rules," she whispered, her voice so small I had to lean closer. "He said my hair was a distraction and against the dress code." The nurse cleared her throat. "Extensions are prohibited under Section 4.7 of the Appearance Guidelines. Artificial hair can harbor lice and—" "Where's the rest of it?" I interrupted, noticing the hoodie Carla clutched tightly around her head. It wasn't hers. Too big, school logo. Someone had given it to her afterward. Clay stepped forward. "Mr. Cross, your daughter was in clear violation, after multiple warnings." "Warnings?" I looked at Carla. "Did he warn you, baby?" She shook her head slightly, eyes down. "Verbal warnings," Clay insisted. "Now, when students refuse to comply with appearance standards, we have procedures." "Show me," I said to Carla, my voice gentle. "It's okay. Show Daddy what happened." Her small fingers trembled as they gripped the hood. She hesitated, then slowly pulled it back. The world stopped. Where my daughter's beautiful braided extensions had been, there was now a crudely shaved scalp, patchy, uneven, with several small cuts that had dried blood around them. Someone had taken a razor to my child's head without skill or care. My training kicked in automatically. I cataloged every injury. 3 visible nicks that had bled, patches where the skin looked raw from too much pressure, the tremor in her lower lip, the way her eyes couldn't meet mine from shame. "Who did this?" The question came out so quietly I barely recognized my own voice. Carla's eyes flicked toward Clay, then away. Deputy Clay was enforcing school policy, the nurse offered, but her voice had lost its certainty. I turned to face Clay fully for the first time. "You put your hands on my daughter's head with a razor?" His stance shifted subtly, weight to the balls of his feet, hand drifting toward his hip where his service weapon rested. I recognized the movement. I'd taught it to men better than him. "Your daughter was given options to comply. When she refused, I took appropriate action to enforce the code." "Where?" I asked. "Excuse me? Where did you take my 8-year-old daughter to cut her hair?" A flash of something, discomfort, maybe even guilt, crossed his face before the professional mask returned. "To a private location where other students wouldn't witness the disciplinary action." Carla's voice came so softly I almost missed it. "The janitor's closet." The nurse's eyes widened slightly. Apparently this detail was new to her too. "He pulled me there," Carla continued, each word seeming to cost her. "Said I was making trouble on purpose. That I needed to learn." Her voice broke. "He used the razor from his bag. It hurt, Daddy." I closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds, a technique I'd developed in the field when the situation demanded absolute control. 3 seconds to feel everything, the rage, the pain, the murderous intent washing through me like napalm. 3 seconds to let it burn hot and clean. Then I opened my eyes, decision made. I lifted Carla gently, cradling her against my chest, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck. The familiar weight of her, the trust in that embrace. It centered me, reminded me what mattered. "We're going to the hospital to document these injuries," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Then we're filing a police report." Clay stepped forward. "Now hold on." "Don't." The word carried 20 years of command authority. Clay froze mid-step. "You took my child into a closet alone. You physically restrained her. You cut her until she bled. Where I come from, we have words for men who do that." The nurse began. "Mr. Cross, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "Take pictures," I told her, my eyes never leaving Clay. "Of every cut, every patch of irritated skin. Put them in her file. Today's date. Deputy Clay's name. Do it now." Something in my tone made her comply without argument. She retrieved her phone with shaking hands and began documenting Carla's injuries. "This isn't over," Clay said, his voice dropping to a threatening register meant only for me. I looked at him then, really looked at him, letting him see what was behind my eyes. The man I'd been, the things I'd done in service to my country, the calculations running through my mind. "No," I agreed softly. "It isn't." Carla's tears were soaking into my collar as I turned to leave, her small body shaking with silent sobs. I held her closer, whispering into her ear, "I've got you, baby girl. I've got you." And as we walked out of that school, I felt something awakening inside me, something I'd buried when I left the service. The cold, precise focus of a man who specialized in solving problems permanently. Deputy Darren Clay had just become a problem. I held Carla through the evening, her small body curled against mine on our worn leather couch. She hadn't spoken much since leaving the school. The hospital visit had been mercifully quick, the emergency room doctor documenting the cuts, taking photos, his face growing grimmer with each one. The police report had been filed with an officer I didn't know, who'd looked uncomfortable the whole time, especially when I mentioned Clay's name. "Hungry, sweetheart?" I asked, gently stroking what remained of her hair. She shook her head, then changed her mind. "Maybe a little." In the kitchen, I made her favorite, grilled cheese with the crusts cut off, sliced into triangles the way she liked. Simple comfort food. I set it before her with a glass of chocolate milk, watching as she took small, mechanical bites. "He said my hair was against the rules," she finally whispered, staring down at her plate. "He said I was being defiant." My hands tightened on the edge of the counter. "Your hair was beautiful, Carla. There was nothing wrong with it." "It hurt, Daddy." Her voice broke. I told him it hurt, but he didn't stop. I moved to her side, kneeling down to eye level. "I need you to know something very important. What he did was wrong. Not just a little wrong. Completely, totally wrong. No adult should ever touch you like that. Ever." Her eyes welled up. The other kids saw me after. They laughed. The tears came then, heavy and unstoppable. I gathered her up, food forgotten, and carried her to the rocking chair in her bedroom, the one I'd used since she was a baby. Back and forth we rocked, her sobs muffled against my chest. I hummed softly an old tune my mother used to sing, feeling each shudder of her small frame like a physical blow. "I don't want to go back there," she whispered between sobs. "You don't have to," I promised. "Not ever if you don't want to." I held her until the crying subsided, until her breathing deepened and her body grew heavy with sleep. Even then, I kept rocking, unwilling to break the contact, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. My beautiful girl, my heart. Only when I was certain she was deeply asleep did I carefully tuck her into bed, placing her favorite stuffed elephant next to her. I stood watching her for a long moment, memorizing the peaceful expression that had finally returned to her face in sleep. Then I quietly closed her door and headed for the basement. The air was cool and slightly musty as I flicked on the lights. This space had been untouched for years, just storage boxes and old furniture gathering dust. I moved to the far corner where a large trunk sat beneath an old sheet. My fingers hesitated only briefly before pulling the cover away. The trunk's combination lock turned easily under my fingers, 1807-39, the date I'd met my wife. Inside, neatly organized, lay the remnants of another life. I removed each item methodically: tactical gear, specialized tools, manuals, and a small metal box containing various identification documents I'd never returned. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was my planning kit. I unwrapped it carefully, feeling the weight of memory as I did. Inside, high-grade topographical maps, colored markers, string, pushpins, and laminated sheets for writing operational details. I cleared a space on the far wall, removing framed photos of happier times. They'd go back up later. For now, I needed the space. First went up the satellite map of our town I'd printed before leaving the hospital. Next, the school layout I'd memorized when Carla first enrolled. Then photos, some from public records, others I'd quietly taken over the years out of ingrained habit. Old instincts never really die. Deputy Darren Clay's official department photo went in the center. Around him, I arranged the others. Principal Whitman, who'd hired Clay and defended him for years despite complaints. Superintendent Morris, who'd implemented the appearance policy Clay had used against Carla. Mayor Hoffman, whose community policing initiative had put Clay in the school to begin with. Red string connected them, creating a web of responsibility. I stepped back, studying the wall with cold detachment. This wasn't rage driving me now. Rage was useless, sloppy. This was purpose, precision, the familiar clarity of mission planning. I took out a notebook and began writing, my handwriting neat and methodical. Intelligence requirements. Every operation begins with information. Without it, you're just thrashing in the dark. I needed to understand exactly how Clay had maintained his position despite what must have been previous incidents. People like him don't start with scalping an 8-year-old girl. There would be a pattern, complaints that were buried, witnesses who were silenced. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m. Carla would sleep through the night with the mild sedative the doctor had prescribed. I had time. I changed into dark clothing, practical and nondescript. Nothing tactical, nothing that would draw attention, just a man out for a late-night walk. In my pocket went a small digital recorder and a pen light. My first stop would be the watering hole, the bar where off-duty officers gathered. Clay would be a regular, no doubt. People talk when they drink, especially when they think they're among friends. And I had always been very good at listening without being noticed. I paused at Carla's door on my way out, opening it just enough to see her sleeping form. The sight hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. About making sure Clay and everyone who enabled him could never hurt another child. I'll fix this. I whispered to her sleeping form. I promise. Then I slipped out into the night, becoming once more the ghost I'd been trained to be. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I'd made my first move. Sitting at my kitchen table, I stared at the burner phone in my hand. The number I needed to dial wasn't saved anywhere. It lived only in my memory, alongside extraction plans and dead drop locations from another lifetime. I hadn't used it in 7 years. I hoped it still worked. 3 rings, then a click. "Whoever this is, it's 5 in the morning," came the gravelly voice, thick with sleep, but instantly alert. "Olga, it's Ghost." A pause. Then, "Cross?" Jesus Christ. The sound of movement, sheets rustling. Either someone's dead or someone's about to be. "The second one," I said, my voice steady. "I need your help." Another pause. "Give me 5 minutes to make coffee." I waited, watching the sunrise through my kitchen window. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, she was back. "All right, I'm sitting down with coffee black as my soul. Talk to me." I told her everything. Carla's beads, Clay's violence, the shaved head, the blood. My voice remained calm and even, but my free hand curled into a fist so tight my knuckles ached. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. Then Olga's voice returned, cold as Arctic steel. "I'll be on the next flight. You don't have to—" "Don't insult me, Cross. That little girl is family. And family means nobody gets left behind." I smiled despite everything. "You and your Disney movies. Mock all you want. Stitch knows what's up." I heard her typing rapidly. "I'm booking a flight to Denver now. Can be at your cabin by nightfall. You still have the equipment cache in the root cellar." "Untouched." "Good. I'm bringing my own toys too. TSA's gotten lazy since we retired." More typing. "In the meantime, send me everything you have on this Clay character. Full name, badge number, date of birth if you have it." Already compiled. I'd spent the pre-dawn hours putting together a dossier. Old habits. "Send it encrypted, Protocol 7. I'll start digging before my flight." "Copy that." "And Cross?" Her voice softened slightly. "How's our girl?" I glanced toward Carla's bedroom where she was still sleeping. "Traumatized, but strong." "Like her father," Olga said. "See you tonight." The line went dead. True to her word, Olga arrived as the sun was setting. I heard the taxi crunching up the gravel driveway and stepped onto the porch. She emerged from the back seat like a storm cloud, 5'4" of concentrated fury in a leather jacket and tactical glasses. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in its familiar tight bun. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting, dragging a suspiciously heavy-looking carry-on behind her. "Good to see you too." We embraced briefly, the familiar smell of her cigarettes and mint gum bringing back a flood of memories. Desert nights, mountain hideouts, the quiet before operations. "Where is she?" Olga asked, her eyes softening. "Inside, finally sleeping without nightmares." Olga nodded. "Good. Let her rest. We have work to do." I led her to the basement where my mission wall had expanded considerably in the last 24 hours. Olga surveyed it with a professional eye, nodding occasionally. "Clean work, you haven't lost your touch." "Neither have you," I said, gesturing to my laptop where her preliminary findings waited. "How'd you get his personnel file so quickly?" She smiled, the expression more predatory than amused. "Their cybersecurity is an insult to the word security." But that's not the interesting part. She set down her bag and unzipped it, revealing not clothes but a portable workstation, multiple tablets, hard drives, and equipment I didn't recognize. "What did you find?" "Patterns." She began connecting devices with practiced efficiency. Clay's had 7 formal complaints filed against him in 4 years, all from parents of minority students, all mysteriously resolved with no disciplinary action. My jaw tightened. Not surprising. Here's where it gets interesting. She pulled up a file on her tablet. "Every officer in that department wears body cams. Policy says footage is stored for 18 months before deletion." I pulled Clay's archive. How did you? She gave me a withering look. Please. I was breaking into Pentagon servers while these small-town IT guys were still playing Oregon Trail. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The problem isn't getting in, it's what's missing once you do. She turned the screen toward me. See these gaps? Each one corresponds exactly to times when Clay was responding to incidents involving minors at the school. Hours of footage, conveniently corrupted or missing entirely. I leaned closer, studying the timeline she'd created. That's not coincidence. Not a chance. Someone's been systematically erasing evidence. She pulled up another screen. But they weren't thorough enough. I found backup server logs that still record when footage was accessed and by whom. Guess who authorized the deletions? Principal Whitman? Close. Vice Principal Garrett. But look who countersigned. She pointed to a digital signature. Mayor Hoffman. The center of my mission web. Exactly. They're protecting him, Cross. This goes beyond one bad cop. This is systematic. I sat back, processing this. Clay's done this before to other children. Olga nodded grimly. The missing footage suggests at least 6 similar incidents. Maybe more. The cold focus inside me crystallized further. We need those videos. Already working on it. She unpacked what looked like an external hard drive with custom modifications. The footage isn't gone, just the pointers to it. Data doesn't disappear, it fragments. With the right tools? She connected the device to her laptop and began typing commands I couldn't follow. This will take time, but if there's anything recoverable, I'll find it. I watched her work, feeling a familiar calm settling over me. This was why Olga had been the best intelligence officer in the unit. She didn't just find information. She found the information others had tried to bury. How long, I asked, for preliminary results? By morning? For everything? A few days. She glanced up at me. We'll get him, Cross, and everyone who helped him. I nodded, studying the mission wall. Yes, we will. I stared at the screens until my eyes burned. For 2 days, Olga and I had barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination as we pieced together fragments of corrupted data. What we found made my blood boil. Got another one, Olga said, her voice flat with disgust. September 17th last year. She turned her laptop so I could see. The footage showed Darren Clay towering over a black teenager in the school hallway, finger jabbing into the boy's chest. The audio was patchy, but Clay's words came through clear enough. Think you're special? Think those grades mean anything when you can't follow simple instructions? The boy's response was inaudible, but whatever he said made Clay grab him by the collar and push him against the lockers. Detention. 3 days. And next time you question my authority, it'll be suspension. I watched the boy's face crumple, the fight draining out of him as Clay released him with a dismissive shove. What was the incident report for this one? I asked, my voice tight. Olga pulled up another file. Student being disruptive during class change. According to Clay's report, the kid was aggressive and threatening. I laughed without humor. The only threat in that hallway was wearing a badge. That's the 14th incident we've recovered, Olga said, rubbing her eyes. Notice the pattern? I nodded grimly. Every single kid is either black or Latino. And every single file was either wiped from the system or marked sensitive, restricted access. She scrolled through her notes. The system logs show these files were accessed by Vice Principal Garrett within days of being recorded, then either corrupted or restricted. They're covering for him, I said, the realization hardening in my gut. They've been doing it for years. Olga nodded, then suddenly straightened. Hold on. I think I've got something big. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. This one wasn't fully wiped, just hidden under triple encryption. But they used the same key structure as the others. The screen flickered and new footage appeared. Unlike the hallway confrontations, this was from inside what looked like a small office. Clay sat behind a desk, a tiny Latino boy, couldn't have been older than 9, trembling in the chair across from him. Do you know why you're here, Miguel? Clay's voice was falsely gentle. The boy shook his head, eyes wide with fear. Because Mrs. Peterson says you stole erasers from her classroom. Did you steal those erasers, Miguel? No, sir, the boy whispered. Clay's face transformed in an instant, slamming his hand on the desk. Don't lie to me. The boy flinched violently, tears immediately streaming down his face. I didn't. Shut up! Clay stood, looming over the desk. You people think you can just take whatever you want, don't you? Think the rules don't apply to you? The boy was sobbing now, curling into himself. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Clay grabbed the boy's chin, forcing his head up. Your kind needs to learn respect. You understand me? I felt my hands curling into fists, nails digging into my palms. I'm going to call your parents, Clay continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. And if they're not legal, maybe I'll make some other calls too. Would you like that, Miguel? The footage cut off abruptly. The silence in my basement felt deafening. Jesus Christ, Olga whispered. I stood up, needing to move, to do something with the rage building inside me. This one's intact? The full file? Yes, perfectly preserved. They hid it instead of corrupting it. She looked up at me, her eyes hard. What are you thinking? The public needs to see this. I paced the length of the basement. The school board, the mayor, they've been protecting him, but they can't ignore this. Olga nodded slowly. I can create an anonymous drop for the local paper. Untraceable. Do it. 3 days later, I stared at the headline on my laptop screen, disbelief warring with fury. School board responds to misleading video. Officers' actions taken out of context. The article quoted school board president Marjorie Williams claiming the selectively edited footage failed to show the full context of a difficult disciplinary situation. Mayor Hoffman stood firmly behind our school resource officers and condemned the illegal hacking that obtained the footage. Not a single word about Clay's threats, not a mention of his racist language, nothing about a grown man terrorizing a 9-year-old child. I slammed the laptop shut. They're circling the wagons, Olga said from the doorway, her face grim. They're protecting a monster, I replied, my voice deadly calm despite the volcanic rage building in my chest. And they're doing it in plain sight. What now? I turned to look at my mission wall, the faces of Clay, Garrett, Williams, and Hoffman staring back at me. Now we stop playing by their rules. The rage inside me wasn't the hot, blinding kind that leads to mistakes. It was cold, focused, and absolute, the kind that reshapes the world. If they won't listen to the truth, I said, then we'll make them feel it. I found Olga in the kitchen the next morning, hunched over her laptop with a mug of coffee gone cold beside her. The circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept. You look like hell, I said, pouring myself a cup. You're welcome, she replied without looking up. The network tap on Clay's home router is active. Every device, every connection, we've got it all. I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. Anything yet? Nothing concrete until… She stopped suddenly, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. Hold on, he's making a call. I set my coffee down and moved behind her. On the screen, a voice transcription program was capturing Clay's words in real time. Captain, it's Clay. Sorry to bother you so early. A gruff voice responded. What is it, Darren? I'm heading into a meeting. Sir, I need to talk about that situation at the school, the leaked footage. I felt my muscles tense. We already discussed this, the captain said, irritation clear in his voice. The department stands behind you. The school board's handling the PR. It's not that, Clay's voice dropped lower. I think I know who might be behind it. That girl's father, Cross, Elijah Cross. My blood went cold. The quiet guy? Lives out by Miller's Creek? Yeah, something's off about him. Way he looked at me that day. I've been asking around. Nobody knows much about him. Moved here 5 years ago with the girl. Keeps to himself. So, half the county keeps to themselves. I ran his name through the system. Nothing came up. No military record, no employment history I could find. Just… nothing. My jaw clenched. He was digging. Maybe he's just a private guy, the captain said. Maybe, or maybe there's something else. I've got a buddy in state records looking deeper. If this guy's behind the leak, I want to know who I'm dealing with. The call continued for another minute, but I'd heard enough. Clay was hunting and he was getting closer. Shut it down, I told Olga, my voice tight. She ended the surveillance program and looked up at me, concern etched across her face. He's going to find something. I knew she was right. My military records were classified, but they existed. Delta Force operatives don't completely disappear. We just become harder to find. With enough determination and the right connections, Clay would eventually uncover who I really was. How long do we have? I asked. Olga shook her head. Days, maybe. His buddy in state records could lead him to federal databases. Once he has your service number. She didn't need to finish. If Clay discovered my Delta background, everything would change. He'd either run, hiding behind layers of protection, or worse, he might decide to strike first, knowing what I was capable of. We need to accelerate, I said, already moving toward the basement stairs. Olga followed me down. Accelerate to what? We still don't have enough leverage to force a public response. I stood before my mission wall, staring at the faces, the connections, the vulnerabilities we'd mapped out over the past weeks. My eyes landed on a glossy invitation pinned to the corner, the mayor's annual charity gala. 7 days, I said, tapping the invitation. The gala. Every power player in the county will be there. The mayor, the school board, the police brass. And Clay, Olga added, seeing where I was going. He's always there, playing the hometown hero. I nodded, my mind racing through scenarios, angles, contingencies. It's our only window left. We bring everything together that night. Olga looked skeptical. That's not much time to prepare. It's all we've got. I pulled a marker from my desk and wrote across the top of the mission wall. 7 days. What exactly are you planning? She asked. I turned to face her, the cold rage I'd been nursing for weeks crystallizing into deadly purpose. Not just exposure, total dismantling. Clay, the school board, the mayor, everyone who protected him. We hit them all at once where they can't hide. That's a big target, Ghost. She used my old operational nickname, a sign she understood the gravity of what I was proposing. I've hit bigger with less time to prepare. I started pulling files from the wall, reorganizing them. We need surveillance on all primary targets. Daily movements, security details, communications. Olga nodded, already pulling out her laptop. I'll start with the venue. Security systems, staff schedules, guest list. Good. I'll work on infiltration and extraction plans. I paused, meeting her eyes. Once we start this, there's no backing out. You understand that? She held my gaze steadily. I was with you in Kandahar, I'm with you now. I felt a flicker of gratitude break through my focus. Olga had always been the one person I could count on without question. Now she was risking everything for my daughter. 7 days, I repeated, circling the date on the wall calendar. Clay thinks he's hunting me. He has no idea what's coming for him. I stared at his smug face pinned to my wall, the face that had terrorized my daughter and countless other children, the face that would soon learn what it meant to be truly afraid. The countdown had begun. I spent the next 3 days barely sleeping. With Clay digging into my background, the clock wasn't just ticking, it was screaming. My basement had transformed from a mission planning room into a full-blown operations center. Maps, blueprints, schedules, and surveillance photos covered every inch of wall space. We've got confirmation, Olga announced, bursting through the door with her laptop. Just intercepted the final event program for the gala. She placed the computer in front of me, pointing to a highlighted section. I read it twice, a cold smile spreading across my face. Deputy Darren Clay, Protector of the Year Award for outstanding service to the youth of our community. My voice dripped with disgust. They're actually giving him an award. It gets better, Olga said, scrolling down. He's giving a 15-minute speech about his dedication to children's safety. I shook my head. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The irony was almost too much. Clay receiving an award for protecting children while Carla's wounds were still healing. But it also gave us exactly what we needed. A captive audience, all the right people in one room, and Clay center stage when everything came crashing down. "Let's finalize the gear list," I said, moving to a large trunk I'd pulled from storage. It contained equipment I hadn't touched in years, tools from my former life that I'd hoped never to use again. Olga joined me as I inventoried what we had. Wireless microphones, 6 of them. Range is about 500 feet. "We'll need to plant them throughout the venue," she said. "Coverage in the main ballroom, backstage, and the service corridors." I nodded, pulling out more equipment. 4 broadcast relay units. These will boost our signal and let us override the venue's AV system when needed. "What about visual?" Olga asked. I reached deeper into the trunk and pulled out 3 compact drones, each no bigger than my palm. Surveillance units, silent motors, 4K cameras, thermal imaging capability. Olga whistled. "Military grade?" "Better," I replied. These were prototypes when I left the service. Perfect for mapping the interior during the event and tracking targets. We spent the next hour going through every piece of gear, testing batteries, checking connections, and making sure nothing would fail when we needed it most. This wasn't like our operations overseas, where we'd had teams of support staff and redundant systems. This was just the 2 of us, and every piece had to work flawlessly. "What about entry?" Olga asked, spreading the venue blueprints across the table. The mayor's annual charity gala was being held at the Westridge Country Club, an exclusive venue with surprisingly decent security. I'd spent yesterday doing a drive-by reconnaissance, noting camera positions and guard rotations. 3 entry points, I said, pointing to the blueprint. "Main entrance here, service entrance on the east side, emergency exit on the north. All monitored, but the service entrance has the lightest coverage." I traced my finger along the blueprint. "Delivery trucks arrive between 4 and 6 p.m. The catering company makes their final drop at 5:30. That's our window." Olga nodded, making notes. "What about inside? Where are the choke points?" I'd memorized the layout over the past 2 days, studying every corridor, stairwell, and potential bottleneck. Main ballroom has 2 entrances from the lobby. Service corridors connect to the kitchen here and here. If security responds, they'll come through these doors first. I marked each point on the blueprint, my mind automatically calculating timing, distances, and fallback positions, just like I'd done hundreds of times in the field. "And the stage?" Olga asked. "Here." I pointed to the raised platform at the north end of the ballroom. "This is where Clay will receive his award. Main AV controls are backstage in this room. That's our primary target for the relay units." I stood back, looking at our work. The plan was taking shape, but I could feel the weight of what we were attempting. This wasn't a sanctioned military operation with extraction plans and backup teams. This was just us taking on an entire system of corruption with nothing but determination and whatever equipment we could cobble together. "You know," Olga said, reading my expression, "in Mosul, we had a whole team and still nearly got our asses handed to us." I smiled slightly at the memory. "This is different." "Yeah," she agreed. "This time it's personal." I moved to another table where I'd laid out the formal attire we'd need. A black tuxedo for me, one I'd purchased years ago for a mission in Monaco and never thought I'd wear again. For Olga, an elegant service uniform that would let her blend in with the catering staff. "Once we're in position," I said, "we'll have approximately 3 hours before Clay receives his award. That gives us time to plant the mics, position the relays, and map the security positions." Olga nodded, her expression serious. "And if something goes wrong? If we're identified?" I met her gaze steadily. "Then we adapt and overcome, just like always." We both knew what I wasn't saying. There was no backup plan, no extraction team. If things went sideways, we'd be on our own against local law enforcement, and I wouldn't be able to protect Carla. "She's staying with Mrs. Hernandez that night," I said, answering Olga's unspoken question. "If anything happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen," Olga cut me off firmly. "We go in, we execute, we get out. Clean and professional." I nodded, though we both knew operations rarely went exactly as planned. Still, we'd faced worse odds before. 3 more days, I said. looking at the countdown I'd marked on the wall. 3 days until Clay learns what real justice feels like. I hadn't pushed my body this hard in years. Every muscle screamed as I dropped for another set of push-ups, sweat pooling beneath me on the basement floor. 55, 56, 57. My arms trembled, but I refused to stop. This wasn't about staying fit anymore. This was preparation for war. After finishing the set, I rolled onto my back, chest heaving. The digital clock on the wall showed 2:17 a.m. 3 days until the gala, and I was training like I was back in selection again, pushing past what my 50-something body thought possible. I stood, ignoring the protest in my knees, and moved to the makeshift obstacle course I'd set up. Timing myself, I navigated through it in complete darkness, relying on spatial memory and the faint ambient light from the small basement window. 8 seconds faster than yesterday. Not good enough. I did it again. And again. And again. By 3:30 a.m., my t-shirt was soaked through, and my hands were raw from the rope work, but physical conditioning was only part of the preparation. I settled into the worn armchair in the corner, closed my eyes, and began running mental drills, visualizing every approach, every corner, every possible complication at the gala venue. What if the service entrance was being watched? What if Olga couldn't access the AV room? What if Clay brought unexpected security? I mapped contingencies for each scenario, building redundancies into redundancies. Adapt and overcome, I whispered to myself, an old mantra from my Delta days. The stakes had never been higher, not even during the most classified missions I'd led. Those operations had national security implications, sure, but this was about Carla, my daughter, the little girl sleeping peacefully 2 floors above me, unaware that her father was plotting an operation that could either restore justice or tear our lives apart permanently. That thought hit me like a physical blow. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, and faced the cold reality. If I failed, if I was caught, Carla would lose me. After everything she'd already endured, she'd be alone again. Another trauma, another abandonment. My chest tightened. For the first time since beginning this mission, doubt crept in like a fog, clouding my resolve. Was I being selfish? Putting my need for justice above Carla's need for stability? I glanced at my watch. Almost 4 a.m. I'd been at this for hours and would be again tomorrow night and the night after. Forcing my aching body up from the chair, I decided to check on Carla before trying to get a few hours of sleep myself. Her door was slightly ajar, just as she liked it. I pushed it open gently, careful not to let the hinges creak. Moonlight spilled through her window, casting a soft glow across her sleeping form. The bandages were still wrapped around her head, covering the wounds where her beautiful braids had once been. Even in sleep, she kept one hand protectively near her scalp. I knelt beside her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. This perfect, innocent child who trusted me to keep her safe. And I had failed her once already. The system had failed her. Everyone had failed her. "I'm sorry," I whispered, so softly it was barely audible even to me. "I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you." Carla stirred slightly but didn't wake. A small frown crossed her face, as if even in sleep, the memory of that day haunted her. I gently touched her hand, the one resting near her injured scalp. "I will make this right," I promised in a whisper. "Whatever it takes." And in that moment, the doubt that had plagued me downstairs evaporated. Yes, there were risks. Yes, I could lose everything. But doing nothing wasn't an option. Not when the people responsible were being celebrated rather than held accountable. Not when my daughter's dignity had been stripped away with such casual cruelty. I stood slowly, my joints protesting after the night's exertion. Tomorrow would bring more preparation, testing communications equipment with Olga, finalizing our approach vectors, running through the timing once more. I'd train again, push harder, become the weapon I once was. As I quietly closed Carla's door, leaving it just slightly ajar, I felt a familiar calm settling over me. It was the same feeling I'd had before the most dangerous missions of my career. Not confidence exactly, but certainty. Certainty that I was doing what needed to be done, regardless of personal cost. Back in my room, I lay down but didn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, mentally reviewing every detail of our plan, searching for weaknesses, identifying potential failure points. Dawn would come soon, and with it, another day closer to the reckoning I'd promised. For Carla, I would become Ghost Hammer one last time. And this time, justice wouldn't be denied. I watched the sunset through the cabin window, the last rays of light disappearing behind the pines. Night was falling on the eve of the gala, the moment we'd been planning for weeks. Every muscle in my body felt taut with anticipation. Behind me, Olga worked with practiced efficiency, transforming our living room into a tactical command center. 3 monitors glowed in the dimness, displaying building schematics, security camera feeds, and a personnel database she'd borrowed from the county records. "Comms check," she said, not looking up from her keyboard. "Earpiece should be live." I tapped the nearly invisible device in my ear. "Reading you 5x5. Good. Remember, I'll have eyes on everything except the Northwest Service Corridor. That's your blind spot." She finally turned to face me, her expression softening just slightly. "You sure about this, Ghost?" I nodded, running my hands down the front of my rented security uniform. The black polyester felt cheap compared to the tactical gear I'd worn in my former life, but it would get me through the door. The ID badge clipped to my breast pocket identified me as Marcus Johnson, courtesy of Olga's forgery skills. "Clay won't know what hit him," I said, checking the fit of my shoulder holster. "No weapon, not yet. That would come tomorrow." Olga handed me a small case. "Surveillance package. Plant these where we discussed." I pocketed the miniature cameras and moved toward the stairs, hesitating at the bottom step. "I need 5 minutes." She understood without further explanation. "I'll finish the final checks." Upstairs, I paused outside Carla's door. She was staying with Mrs. Abernathy next door tonight, a precaution I'd insisted on, just in case. I pushed open the door to her empty room, moonlight streaming through the window onto her neatly made bed. From my pocket, I pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter I'd written earlier that day. My hands weren't entirely steady as I placed it on her pillow. If things went wrong tomorrow, if I didn't come back, she needed to know why. Why I'd risked everything, why I couldn't let what happened to her go unanswered. The letter explained everything: who I really was, what I'd done in my former life, and most importantly, how much I loved her, how she had saved me from the darkness after losing her mother, how she deserved better than what this world had given her. "I hope you never have to read this," I whispered to the empty room. Back downstairs, Olga handed me a burner phone. "For emergency extraction only." I slipped it into my pocket and nodded. "See you on the other side." The night air hit me like a cold shower as I stepped outside. I moved silently through the trees, muscle memory from years of covert operations taking over. My truck was parked a quarter-mile away, hidden from the main road. As I drove toward town, toward the venue where tomorrow's gala would celebrate the very people who had hurt my daughter, I felt a familiar sensation flooding my veins. The steady thrum of adrenaline, the heightened awareness of every detail around me, the absolute clarity of purpose. Ghost Hammer was back in the field, and this time it was personal. I arrived at the community center 2 hours before the gala's official start time. The rented security uniform fit perfectly, and the forged badge clipped to my chest pocket felt like a talisman of invisibility. No one questioned me as I walked through the service entrance, nodding at the real security guards with the practiced confidence of someone who belonged. "In position," I murmured, my lips barely moving. "Copy that," Olga's voice crackled in my ear. "I've got eyes on the main hall, kitchen, and both entrances. You're clear to move." The community center had been transformed for tonight's event. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the walls, and a small stage stood at the far end of the room adorned with the town seal and a podium. A banner hung above it all, "Honoring our community heroes." My stomach clenched. Community hero. That's what they were calling him. I positioned myself near the back wall, clipboard in hand, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. To anyone watching, I was just another security guard doing my job. But my eyes were cataloging every exit, every blind spot, every potential complication. "First guests arriving," Olga reported. "Mayor's car just pulled up." I watched as the room gradually filled with the town's elite, business owners, council members, and their spouses, all dressed in their finest. They mingled and laughed, champagne flutes in hand, completely unaware of what was coming. At precisely 7:45 p.m., Deputy Darren Clay walked in. My hand instinctively tightened around the clipboard. He looked exactly as he had that day at the school, clean-cut, confident, his uniform pressed to perfection. The smugness in his smile made my blood boil. "Target has entered," I whispered. "Easy, Ghost," Olga cautioned in my ear. "Stick to the plan." I forced myself to breathe, to loosen my grip. Clay moved through the crowd like a minor celebrity, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Tonight, he would receive the department's highest civilian honor for his outstanding contribution to school safety. The irony might have made me laugh if it hadn't made me sick. As the ceremony began, I shifted positions, moving closer to the stage. The mayor spoke first, followed by the police chief, both singing Clay's praises, lauding his dedication to the community's children. "All cameras are in place," Olga confirmed. "Kill switch is prepped and waiting for your signal." I reached into my pocket, feeling the small device nestled there. One button. That's all it would take. "And now," the police chief announced, "it is my great pleasure to present this year's Public Service Excellence Award to Deputy Darren Clay." Applause filled the room as Clay approached the podium, his face beaming with self-satisfaction. I moved to the side of the stage, positioning myself just out of his peripheral vision, but close enough to see every detail of his face. "Thank you, Chief," Clay began, his voice dripping with false humility. "This is truly an honor. When I began my career in law enforcement, I never imagined I'd find my calling in our schools, protecting our most precious resource, our children." My jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grinding. I thought of Carla's face when I found her in the nurse's office, the patches of missing hair, the fear in her eyes. Clay continued his speech, weaving a narrative of dedication and sacrifice. "Sometimes the job requires making tough decisions. Not everyone understands the pressures we face, the split-second judgments we must make." The audience nodded in solemn agreement. They had no idea what he had done, what he was capable of. "But at the end of the day," Clay said, his voice rising with practiced emotion, "knowing that our children can learn in a safe environment makes it all worthwhile." I pulled the device from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the button. In my ear, Olga's breathing had gone silent. She was waiting, just as I was. Clay reached the climax of his speech, arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimity. "And so I accept this award not for myself, but for all the children whose lives I've touched." I pressed the button, the lights went out instantly. The microphone died mid-sentence. Emergency lights flickered on seconds later, casting the room in an eerie, dim glow. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then the projector screen behind Clay blazed to life, powered by our separate generator. And there he was, in high definition, towering over the real Clay who stood frozen at the podium. The footage played in perfect clarity. Clay dragging Carla down the hallway by her hair. Clay slamming her against the wall. Clay taking scissors to her hair while she sobbed. Every brutal second captured by the school security cameras that we'd hacked into. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone screamed. The real Clay spun around, his face contorting in horror as he watched himself on screen. "What is this?" the mayor shouted. "Get that off! Turn it off!" But no one could. We'd locked out the system completely. Clay lunged for the screen as if he could tear down the images with his bare hands. "This isn't... You don't understand?" His voice was drowned out as the audio kicked in, his own words playing back for everyone to hear. "Think you're special, huh? Think those braids make you better than everyone else? Let's see how special you look now." I stood motionless in the shadows, watching as Clay's carefully constructed world began to crumble. His face had gone chalk white, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal's. "Phase 1 complete," I whispered to Olga, moving to phase 2. I stepped out from the shadows as the footage played, my heart hammering against my ribs. The spotlight found me. Whether by Olga's design or pure coincidence, I couldn't tell, but I embraced it. I moved deliberately toward the center of the stage, each step measured and calm despite the chaos erupting around me. Clay stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw the flash of recognition there, the fear. Good. The room was in uproar, security personnel rushing toward the projection equipment, the mayor shouting orders, guests standing in shocked clusters, phones raised to capture everything. But as I stepped fully into the light, a strange hush fell over the crowd. I adjusted the small microphone I'd concealed in my jacket, one of Olga's special designs that would override the venue's disabled sound system. When I spoke, my voice carried through the room with perfect clarity. "My name is Elijah Cross," I announced, keeping my tone even and controlled, "and the man you're honoring tonight assaulted my daughter." The silence that followed was absolute, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. Then came the gasps, the whispers that spread like wildfire through the crowd. I could almost feel the vibration of shock in the air. "That's a lie!" Clay shouted, lunging toward me. 2 security guards moved to intercept him, but they seemed uncertain, torn between restraining the man they'd come to celebrate or the stranger making accusations. I didn't flinch. Instead, I gestured toward the screen behind us where the footage continued to play in damning detail. "The evidence speaks for itself, Deputy Clay." As if on cue, and it was thanks to Olga's impeccable timing, the single projection expanded to fill every digital surface in the room. The screens normally displaying the gala's sponsors, the televisions at the bar, even the digital photo frames on the tables, all suddenly showed different angles of Clay's abuse. "My daughter, Carla Cross, is 15 years old," I continued, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. 3 weeks ago, she wore traditional braids to school, braids that connected her to her heritage, braids that violated no school policy. The footage shifted to show Carla being pulled from class, Clay's hand gripping her arm with unnecessary force. Deputy Clay decided those braids were, in his words, gang-related. When she tried to explain their cultural significance, he dragged her to the detention room. The room was so quiet now that the audio from the footage seemed to echo, Clay's voice distorted but unmistakable. "You think you're special? Let's fix that attitude." I watched faces in the crowd, shock giving way to horror, to disgust. The police chief had gone pale. The mayor looked like he might be sick. "For 43 minutes, I said, each word deliberate. "He humiliated my child. He cut her hair against her will. He slammed her against the wall when she tried to stop him. And when he was done, he left her alone, bleeding from where he'd nicked her scalp, surrounded by the braids that took hours to create. Braids that represented her connection to her mother." Clay made another move toward me, but this time the security guards held him firmly. "That's not what happened," he shouted, his composure completely shattered. "She was defiant. She threatened me." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Is that what happened, Deputy Clay? Because I have the audio from that room, too." With a nod to Olga, the footage changed again. Now the screens showed Carla's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged, "Please stop. Please. My dad made these with me. Please." And Clay's response, "Your dad should have taught you to respect authority. Maybe this will teach you both a lesson." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, angrier. Someone near the back shouted, "Get him off the stage." But they weren't talking about me. "I tried the proper channels," I said, addressing the room at large now. "I filed complaints. I contacted the school board. I reached out to local media. And I was ignored, dismissed, told that Deputy Clay's record was spotless, that my daughter must have provoked him somehow." I stepped closer to Clay, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead, the panic in his eyes. "So I'm bringing the truth directly to you, his supporters, his community, the people whose approval he craves, because you deserve to know who you're celebrating tonight." Clay finally broke free from the guards, lunging at me with a roar of rage. I sidestepped easily, the movement so ingrained from years of training that it was practically reflex. He stumbled past me, nearly falling off the edge of the stage before catching himself. "You're ruining me," he screamed, his face contorted with fury. "You have no right." I stood my ground, my voice never rising as I replied, "You ruined yourself the moment you put your hands on my child." The police chief had finally recovered enough to take action. He climbed onto the stage, flanked by 2 officers, but to my surprise, they moved toward Clay, not me. "Darren Clay," the chief said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "you need to come with us. Now." As they led Clay away, his protests echoing through the stunned ballroom, I remained center stage, bathed in the spotlight, watching justice begin to unfold. The audience's stunned silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the room erupted. "Get that monster," someone shouted from the back. A woman at one of the front tables stood up, pointing at Clay. "My daughter had detention with him last month. She came home crying." It was like a dam breaking. Voices rose over one another, creating a cacophony of outrage that bounced off the ornate walls. Reporters who had been lazily covering the gala as a puff piece suddenly sprang into action, shoving microphones toward the stage, their cameramen elbowing through the crowd. "Mr. Cross, how long did this abuse go on? Was your daughter the only victim? Did the school board know about the—" The questions hit me like machine gun fire, but I kept my eyes on Clay. He was cornered now, flanked by the police chief and 2 officers, his face contorting through a series of emotions: rage, disbelief, and finally the dawning realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling around him. In the front row, I spotted parents I recognized from school functions. A mother with her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. A father standing rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. These were people who had trusted Clay with their children, who had believed the officer-friendly act he put on for the community. The police chief leaned in close to Clay, saying something I couldn't hear over the commotion. Whatever it was, it triggered something primal in Clay. His eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal's, and then, with a sudden violent shove, he pushed the chief aside. "This is a setup," he screamed, backing away. "You're all being manipulated." The crowd gasped as Clay turned and bolted toward the exit, shoving past a waiter and sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass seemed to punctuate the moment, the shattering of his reputation, his career, his freedom. But Clay never made it to the door. 2 men in dark suits moved with coordinated precision, emerging from opposite sides of the exit. I recognized them immediately, not their faces, but their movements. Federal agents, moving with the efficient economy of those trained to take down threats without collateral damage. They timed it perfectly. Just as Clay reached the exit, thinking he was home free, they converged. The first agent swept Clay's legs, while the second drove a shoulder into his midsection. Clay went down hard, the air audibly leaving his lungs as he hit the polished floor. "Darren Clay," the first agent announced, his voice carrying across the now hushed room as he pulled Clay's arms behind his back. "You are under arrest for civil rights violations under color of law, assault of a minor, and obstruction of justice." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom. I stood motionless on the stage, watching as the man who had terrorized my daughter, who had believed himself untouchable, was restrained and read his rights. The federal agents had been my insurance policy, Olga's contacts ensuring that regardless of local politics, Clay would face consequences. Camera flashes exploded around Clay, capturing his moment of disgrace from every angle. The mighty Protector of the Year, the man who was supposed to be receiving an award tonight, instead being dragged away in cuffs, his uniform, the symbol of his authority, now disheveled and stained from his fall. "Dad?" I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket and pulled it out to see Olga's text. "Carla's watching the live stream. She wants to talk to you." I stepped away from the microphones, finding a quieter corner of the stage as I put the phone to my ear. "Carla? Are you okay? Is it over?" Her voice was small, tentative. Did they really arrest him? I watched as the federal agents escorted Clay toward a side exit, his head bowed now, the fight gone out of him. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over. He can't hurt you or anyone else anymore." I heard her exhale a shaky breath that carried the weight of weeks of fear and trauma. "Good," she said simply. Across the room, officials were scrambling. The mayor had taken the microphone and was trying to restore order, promising a full investigation, distancing himself from Clay with every word. School board members huddled in a corner, their expressions grim as reporters circled them like sharks scenting blood. "Mr. Cross?" A woman approached me, her press badge identifying her as from one of the national networks. "Would you be willing to share more of your daughter's story? The country needs to hear this." I looked down at the phone in my hand, thinking of Carla watching from home. "That's not my decision to make," I told the reporter. "It's my daughter's story to tell, if and when she's ready." The reporter nodded, surprising me with her respect for that boundary. "Then would you at least tell us who you are? How you managed to expose this when the system failed?" I considered her question as I watched Clay disappear through the exit, flanked by the agents. In my ear, I could hear Carla's breathing, waiting for my answer. "I'm just a father," I said finally, "who refused to let his daughter's pain be ignored." I slipped out of the gala through a service entrance while everyone's attention remained fixed on the chaos inside. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped into the alley, and for the first time in weeks, I took a full, deep breath. My phone buzzed continuously in my pocket. Journalists who'd somehow gotten my number, no doubt, but I ignored it. There was only one person I wanted to talk to. "I'm on my way home," I told Carla when she answered. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay." Her voice sounded stronger than it had in weeks. "Olga's making popcorn. She says we're going to watch the news explode." I couldn't help but smile at that. "Tell her I'll be there in 20. As I drove home, the radio filled me in on what was happening. Clay's arrest was already breaking news on every station. I switched between channels, each one more frenzied than the last. Shocking revelation at tonight's law enforcement gala. Footage appears to show systematic targeting of minority students. Sources say federal investigators had been building a case for weeks. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. I ignored them all and went inside, where Carla and Olga were huddled on the couch, eyes glued to the television. "Dad!" Carla jumped up and wrapped her arms around me. I held her tight, feeling her heartbeat against mine. Her hair was growing back, just a soft fuzz covering her scalp, but a sign of healing nonetheless. "You're just in time," Olga said, nodding toward the TV. "They're about to announce the indictment." We settled on the couch together as the news anchor's grave face filled the screen. Breaking news tonight. Deputy Darren Clay has been formally indicted on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, assault of a minor, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. Sources within the Justice Department confirm the charges carry a potential sentence of up to 25 years, if convicted on all counts. The screen cut to footage of Clay being escorted into a federal building, his face ashen, shoulders slumped. Gone was the swagger, the smirk, the certainty of immunity. In its place was the hollow look of a man watching his life crumble. "Dad, they're talking about you," Carla said, squeezing my hand. The anchor continued. The evidence that led to Clay's arrest was dramatically revealed by Elijah Cross, father of one of Clay's alleged victims, during what was supposed to be Clay's award ceremony. Cross, a former military operative, apparently conducted his own investigation after local authorities failed to act on his complaints. They showed a clip from the gala, me standing on stage, face partially obscured by shadows, as the damning footage played behind me. I looked like a stranger to myself. "They don't know what to make of you," Olga said with a hint of pride. "Military operative who took down a corrupt cop. You're going to be a folk hero." I shook my head. That's not what this was about. The news continued its relentless pace. By midnight, the story had expanded beyond Clay. The school board was next. In related developments, the entire school board has been placed on administrative leave pending a state investigation into their handling of complaints against Deputy Clay. Internal emails obtained by this station appear to show board members actively suppressing parent complaints dating back 3 years. Carla sat up straighter. They knew. All this time, they knew. I put my arm around her shoulders. Power protects power until it can't anymore. By morning, the dominoes were still falling. We woke to news alerts about emergency meetings, public statements, and resignations. The mayor was the biggest casualty of the day. Mayor Wilson has announced his immediate resignation following revelations of his role in protecting Deputy Darren Clay. In a brief statement, Wilson denied direct knowledge of Clay's actions, but acknowledged catastrophic failures of oversight under his administration. We watched his resignation speech over breakfast. The mayor looked haggard, his usual confidence replaced by nervous glances and a trembling voice. As the evidence has made clear, I failed in my duty to protect all citizens equally. While I never condoned or knew the full extent of Deputy Clay's actions, I must take responsibility for the system that allowed them to continue. I am stepping down effective immediately. Olga raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. And another one bites the dust. Over the next few days, I declined every interview request. News vans parked at the end of our road, but our property was too remote for them to get close. I watched from a distance as the media frenzy continued without me. The school superintendent resigned. 2 more officers from Clay's department were suspended pending investigation. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of 27 students who had allegedly been targeted by Clay over the years. They're calling it a systematic dismantling of institutional racism in law enforcement, Olga said, reading from her tablet one evening. Your little operation turned into a reckoning. I shrugged. It was never about changing the system, it was about protecting my daughter. But the system was changing whether I'd intended it or not. Clay's indictment sparked investigations in 3 neighboring counties. Police departments across the state announced reviews of their school resource officer programs. The governor established a task force on civil rights in educational settings. A week after the gala, Carla returned to school. I drove her there myself, watching carefully as she walked through the front doors. No uniformed officer stood guard anymore. Instead, parent volunteers greeted students and teachers stood in the hallways, more vigilant than before. When I picked her up that afternoon, Carla seemed lighter somehow. How was it? I asked as she climbed into the car. She thought for a moment. Different. Better. Then she added, Some kids thanked me. Said their older brothers or sisters had problems with Clay too, but nobody believed them. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. And how did that make you feel? Like maybe something good came out of something bad. She looked out the window, watching the town pass by. Like maybe it was worth it. I woke before dawn, moving quietly through our cabin. The house had felt different since that night at the gala. Lighter somehow, as if a storm had passed. I'd spent days fielding calls from lawyers, journalists, and even a few Hollywood producers wanting rights to our story. I declined them all. Our story wasn't for sale. Today wasn't about any of that. Today was about Carla. I knocked gently on her door. Time to get up, sweetheart. She was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed in the pale blue light of early morning. The scabs on her scalp had started to heal, but the uneven patches of hair remained a constant reminder. Where are we going? She asked, her voice small. It's a surprise, I said, but I think you'll like it. We drove in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly as we left our rural hideaway behind and headed toward the city. Carla watched the scenery change from dense forest to scattered suburbs to urban sprawl. I caught her occasionally touching her head in the reflection of the passenger window, her fingers tracing the damaged areas with a gentleness that broke my heart. Almost there, I said as we turned onto Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The neighborhood was just waking up, shopkeepers raising security gates, early commuters waiting at bus stops. I pulled into a parking space in front of a storefront with a purple awning. Crown and Glory Hair Salon was written in gold lettering across the window. I'd called ahead, explaining our situation. The owner had agreed to open early just for us. Carla stared at the sign, then at me. Dad? You don't have to if you're not ready, I said, but I thought maybe. She unbuckled her seatbelt before I could finish. Some decisions don't need words. A bell chimed as we entered. The salon smelled of coconut oil and shea butter, familiar scents that immediately took me back to my wife's morning routines. The space was empty except for a woman arranging tools at the main styling station. "You must be Mr. Cross," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Desiree." "Thank you for doing this," I said, shaking her hand. "This is Carla." Desiree crouched down to Carla's level, her face softening. "Hello, beautiful girl. I hear you've had a rough time." Carla nodded, her eyes on the floor. "Well, you've come to the right place. Nobody leaves Desiree's chair without feeling like royalty." She gestured to the styling chair. "Want to hop up and tell me what you're thinking?" Carla climbed into the chair but remained silent. I stepped forward, ready to explain, but Desiree gave me a look that said she understood. "You know what?" she said, turning the chair so Carla could see herself in the mirror. "I have some pictures I can show you. Different styles, different braids. You can point to what you like." She brought out a leather-bound portfolio and began flipping through it slowly. Carla's eyes widened at the photos of intricate braids, beaded styles, and protective hairstyles of all kinds. "These are all my clients," Desiree explained. "Every kind of beautiful you can imagine." Carla's finger stopped on a page showing box braids with subtle purple accents woven through. "That one," she whispered. Desiree smiled. "Excellent choice. Very elegant." I settled into a waiting chair as Desiree began gathering supplies. The salon gradually filled with more stylists arriving for the day, each greeting us warmly. No one asked about Carla's damaged hair or the news stories that had been circulating. Here she was just another girl getting her hair done. "This might take a few hours," Desiree told me. "You're welcome to stay, or if you need to run errands." "I'm staying," I said firmly. And so I watched as Desiree worked her magic, her fingers moving with practiced precision. She started by gently treating Carla's scalp with oils, explaining each step as she went. "This will help your natural hair grow back strong," she said, massaging the mixture into the damaged areas. "And the braids will protect it while it heals." Carla winced occasionally when Desiree touched tender spots, but she didn't complain. I saw the same quiet resilience that had gotten her through these past weeks, the strength she'd always had, even when I'd been too focused on my own anger to notice it. Other clients began arriving, filling the salon with chatter and laughter. Several women stopped to compliment Carla's emerging style, offering encouragement as the braids took shape. An older woman in a chair next to Carla's reached over and patted her hand. "You're going to look magnificent, baby," she said. "Just magnificent." 3 hours later, Desiree made the final adjustments, weaving in subtle strands of purple that caught the light when Carla moved her head. "Ready to see?" she asked, positioning a hand mirror to show the back. Carla nodded, her eyes fixed on her reflection as Desiree slowly rotated the chair. I watched my daughter's face, holding my breath. For a moment, she just stared. Then, like sunshine breaking through clouds after a long storm, she smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since that day at school. "I love it," she whispered, turning her head to see every angle. "I really love it." Something tight in my chest finally released. I exhaled slowly, feeling weeks of tension drain from my body. This was what the whole fight had been for. Not revenge, not justice, but this. My daughter's smile returned. I stood there watching my daughter's face transform with joy as she admired her new braids in the mirror. The purple accents caught the light as she turned her head from side to side, her fingers gently touching the intricate pattern Desiree had woven. "What do you think, Dad?" Carla asked, her eyes meeting mine in the reflection. "You look beautiful, baby girl," I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. "Just like royalty." A lump formed in my throat as I watched her beam at her reflection. This moment, this simple, ordinary moment of a girl happy with her hair, had nearly cost us everything. I thought about the wall in our cabin now stripped of its mission plans and surveillance photos. I thought about the encrypted files Olga and I had compiled, the nights spent tracking Clay's movements, the federal agents who'd been so eager to add his crimes to their ongoing investigation. I thought about how close I'd come to crossing lines I'd sworn never to cross again after leaving Delta. Some wars leave nothing but ashes, but some, the ones fought for the right reasons, are worth every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of fear. You did an amazing job, I told Desiree as Carla continued to admire her new look. I can't thank you enough. Desiree smiled, packing away her tools. It was my pleasure. That child deserves to feel beautiful. I reached for my wallet. What do I owe you? She named a figure and I counted out twice that amount, placing the cash in her hand. Mr. Cross, this is too much, she protested. No, I said quietly, it's not nearly enough. Her eyes softened with understanding. She'd seen the news, like everyone else in town. She knew what this meant. Well, Miss Carla, she said, turning back to my daughter, you take good care of those braids now. I wrote down all the instructions for keeping them nice. And you come back and see me in 6 weeks, you hear? Carla nodded solemnly. I will. I extended my hand to Desiree. Thank you for everything. She shook it firmly. You're a good father, Mr. Cross. Don't let anyone tell you different. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For weeks, I'd questioned every decision I'd made since adopting Carla. Should I have enrolled her in a different school? Should we have lived somewhere more diverse? Had my choice to raise her in isolation made her more vulnerable? But looking at Carla now, her head held high, her posture straighter than it had been in weeks, I knew we'd find our way forward. Ready to go? I asked her. She hopped down from the chair, her braids swinging with the movement. Where are we going? I glanced outside at the clear blue sky. Spring had finally arrived in full force, washing away the last remnants of winter. It's too nice to go straight home. Let's go somewhere sunny. Her eyes lit up. The lake? The lake it is. We said our goodbyes and stepped out into the warm afternoon. The sidewalk was busy with weekend shoppers, and I noticed how several people did double takes as we passed. The story had been all over local news, then national when the federal investigation broke. Carla's case had become a rallying point for discussions about racial bias in schools, about abuse of power, about children's rights. But today we weren't symbols or headlines, we were just a father and daughter heading to the lake on a beautiful day. I helped Carla into the truck, making sure her seatbelt was secure before climbing in myself. As we drove through town, I caught her watching the people we passed, her eyes wary. You okay? I asked. She nodded slowly. Do you think people will be mean about my hair again? The question pierced me like a knife. No, I said firmly. And if anyone ever tries, they'll have to answer to me. But more importantly, they'll have to answer to a whole lot of other people now. Things are changing, Carla. Because of us? Because of you, I corrected her. You were brave enough to tell the truth about what happened. That's made a difference for a lot of kids. She considered this, her small face serious. I wasn't brave when it happened. I was scared. Being scared and being brave can happen at the same time, I told her. That's something I learned a long time ago. We turned onto the lakeside road, the water glittering in the distance. I found our usual spot, a quiet stretch of shoreline away from the more popular beaches. As soon as I parked, Carla unbuckled and hopped out, running toward the water's edge. I followed more slowly, watching as she picked up stones to skip across the surface. The sun caught the purple in her braids, making them shine. Her laughter carried back to me on the breeze. A month ago, I'd been prepared to burn down the whole town to avenge her. Now, watching her stand tall in the sunshine, I understood that our redemption wasn't in the punishment we'd brought to those responsible. It was here, in this moment, my daughter reclaiming her joy, one skip of a stone at a time. I joined her at the water's edge, selecting a flat stone of my own. Show me how again, Dad, she asked. And so I did, our stones dancing across the sun-dappled water, leaving ripples that spread and faded into the vast blue. I watched Carla crouch by the water's edge, her braids tied back with a purple scrunchie to keep them from dragging in the sand. Her small hands worked methodically, packing wet sand into her plastic bucket, then flipping it over with practiced precision. The resulting tower stood proud for a moment before the bottom began to soften, making it lean slightly. "Dad, I need more shells for the windows," she called. "Coming right up," I replied, pushing myself up from our beach blanket. The lake beach was nearly deserted this late in the afternoon. Most families had packed up and headed home for dinner, leaving just the two of us and an elderly couple walking their dog in the distance. I liked it better this way. Quiet, peaceful, with room to breathe and think. I scanned the shoreline for suitable shells, collecting a handful of the small, pearlescent ones Carla preferred. My mind drifted as I walked, the rhythm of the small waves lapping at my feet pulling me into a contemplative state. It had been 3 weeks since the gala, 3 weeks since Deputy Clay had been led away in handcuffs, 3 weeks of statements and interviews and meetings with lawyers. Through it all, I'd kept Carla as sheltered as possible, but there was no denying that our lives had fundamentally changed. "These work?" I asked, kneeling beside her growing castle complex. She examined my offerings with serious consideration. "Perfect. This one's for the tower." I watched as she pressed a curved shell into the side of the tallest structure, creating a tiny window. Her focus was complete, her tongue poking out slightly between her lips as she concentrated. The sun caught the edges of her new braids, highlighting the purple strands woven among the black. The stylist had suggested the color might help Carla feel ownership of her hair again. Looking at her now, I thought she'd been right. The water crept closer as the tide came in, threatening the outer wall of Carla's creation. She noticed and quickly began digging a moat, trying to channel the water away from her castle. "Need help with that?" I asked. She shook her head. "I got it. You can just watch." So I did. I sat back on my heels and watched my daughter work, struck by how much older she seemed than just a few months ago. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. But there was strength too, a resilience I recognized. The tide continued its inevitable advance. Despite Carla's best efforts with the moat, a larger wave sent water rushing toward the castle's foundation. She made a small sound of dismay as the outer wall began to dissolve. "It's okay," I said softly. "We can build another one higher up." She sat back on her heels, considering the damage. "I knew it was going to happen," she said finally. "The water always comes." Something about her matter-of-fact acceptance hit me hard. I looked out at the lake, its surface shimmering in the late afternoon sun. The water always comes. No matter how carefully you build, no matter how strong your walls, change is inevitable. "You know what this reminds me of?" I said. Carla looked up at me, curious. "What?" "Something my old commander used to tell us." I picked up a handful of wet sand, letting it filter through my fingers. He'd say, "Real warriors don't win by rage. They win by never being seen. Until it's too late." "Like ninjas?" Carla asked, her eyes widening with interest. I smiled. "Something like that. He meant that the loudest person isn't usually the most effective. True power often works quietly, like the tide. You don't see it coming until suddenly everything has changed." She looked back at her partially collapsed castle, considering this. "Like how the water just keeps coming a little bit at a time?" "Exactly," I nodded. "People underestimate things that move slowly and quietly. That's what we did with Deputy Clay and the others. We didn't fight them head on. We let the evidence speak for itself." "And now they're in trouble," she said. "They are." I watched as another wave crept closer to what remained of the castle. "Justice sometimes works like the tide, Carla. It might seem slow, but it's unstoppable once it starts moving." She nodded solemnly, then suddenly brightened. "Can we build a new castle? One that's safe from the water?" Of course. We moved further up the beach and Carla began gathering fresh supplies. I helped her pack the base, making it wide and strong. As we worked, I found myself thinking about legacy, what we leave behind when the tide washes away our footprints. My military career had left its mark on the world, though most would never know my name or what I'd done. That had been the point, to be the unseen force, the tide that changed everything without being noticed. But this, what we'd done for Carla, for the other children who'd suffered similar injustices, this was different. This would leave ripples that others could see and follow. "Dad, you're not helping," Carla said, breaking into my thoughts. I realized I'd been sitting motionless, the bucket of sand forgotten in my hands. "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" I patted the sand into place before answering. "About making things better. Not just for us, but for others too." She considered this as she carefully placed a row of shells along the top of a wall. Like how the school has to change its rules now? Exactly like that. The federal investigation had already resulted in a complete overhaul of the school's disciplinary procedures. The board members had resigned. The mayor was fighting for his political life, but more importantly, parents were speaking up, demanding better for their children. "I'm glad," Carla said simply, "so other kids don't have to be scared." I looked at my daughter, this remarkable, resilient child who'd endured so much yet still thought of others. Pride swelled in my chest, almost painful in its intensity. "Me too," I said. "That's what justice is supposed to do, make things safer for everyone." The new castle took shape under our hands, more elaborate than the first. Carla had learned from the tide's advance, building higher on the beach, adding stronger walls. She worked with confidence now, occasionally directing me to fetch more water or find specific shells. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across our creation, I realized that this moment of peace, of ordinary joy, was what I'd really been fighting for all along. Not vengeance, not even justice, though that mattered. What mattered most was sitting right beside me, humming softly as she put the finishing touches on a sandcastle that would, inevitably, return to the earth. But for now, in this moment, it stood proud against the coming tide. I turned off my phone with a satisfying click and set it face down on the porch table. The battery would last for days now, not that it mattered. I'd already deleted every trace of my digital footprint in this whole affair. The encrypted drives, the surveillance footage, the careful documentation of every moment of Clay's corruption. All of it handed over to the federal authorities with no strings attached. "Dad, look!" Carla called from the yard where she was attempting a cartwheel. Her braids, new, beautiful, and exactly how she wanted them, swung wildly as she tumbled onto the grass in a giggling heap. "Almost got it," I said, smiling. "Keep your arms straight next time." She nodded seriously, then immediately tried again with the same result. Her laughter carried across our property, louder and more meaningful than any breaking news alert or viral headline. 3 weeks had passed since the gala, since Clay's arrest and the subsequent collapse of his little empire. The story had exploded across national media. Corrupt deputy, systemic abuse of power, racist policies targeting children. Hashtags trended, outrage flowed, investigations expanded, and through it all my name appeared nowhere. Olga had called yesterday, frustrated. "They're looking for you, you know. Every reporter in 3 states wants the story behind the story. You could write a book, go on talk shows." "Not interested," I told her. "You deserve credit," she'd insisted. "Credit isn't what I was after." The truth was I'd never wanted recognition. That wasn't how I'd operated in Delta, and it wasn't how I operated now. The mission had been about justice, not glory, about Carla, not me. My phone buzzed against the table. I ignored it. "Dad, I'm thirsty," Carla announced, abandoning her gymnastics routine and bounding up the porch steps. "Water or lemonade?" I asked, rising from my chair. "Lemonade, please." She followed me into the kitchen, her footsteps light against the wooden floor. As I poured her drink, I glanced at the newspaper on the counter. The headline was smaller now, relegated to page 3. "School Board Overhaul Complete, New Policies Implemented." The article detailed how the district had adopted comprehensive anti-discrimination rules, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, and strict oversight of disciplinary actions. Clay himself was facing federal civil rights charges, his bond revoked after evidence emerged that he'd attempted to intimidate witnesses. The mayor had announced he wouldn't seek re-election. The school principal had resigned. The system was being rebuilt from the ground up, all without my name attached to any of it. Is that about the bad people? Carla asked, noticing my attention on the newspaper. It's about the changes happening at your school, I said, handing her the glass of lemonade. She took a long drink, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Ms. Rodriguez says we're getting a new principal who's really nice, and they're not allowed to touch anybody's hair anymore. That's good. Yeah. She traced the condensation on her glass with one finger. Some kids at school said their parents were talking about you. They said you made all the bad stuff stop. I crouched down to her level. What did you tell them? She shrugged. I said my dad is just my dad. Something warm spread through my chest. That's right, just your dad. But a really good one, she added seriously. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck. This moment right here was worth more than any public recognition or media attention. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, we sat on the porch swing together. Carla had her head against my shoulder, half dozing after a day full of outdoor play. My phone remained untouched on the table, its notifications piling up unread. There had been offers, interview requests, book deals, even a documentary proposal, all deleted, all ignored. The thought of cameras, of microphones thrust in my face, of having to relive those moments for public consumption made my skin crawl. I'd spent a lifetime operating in the shadows, and that's where I belonged. Besides, publicity would only complicate Carla's life further. She deserved normalcy, not to be known as that girl whose father had exposed corruption. She'd been through enough. Dad? She murmured sleepily. Are we safe now? I looked down at her, at the peaceful expression on her face, at the healthy new growth of hair around her healing scalp. Yes, sweetheart, we're safe. Good, she yawned, because I like it when things are quiet. Me too, I said softly. The world would move on. New headlines would take the place of old ones. People would forget the details, remember only the outcome. And that was exactly as it should be. What mattered wasn't who had exposed the truth, but that the truth had been exposed. What mattered wasn't who had brought justice, but that justice had been served. The system had been broken, and now it was being fixed. Children like Carla would be protected. That was enough. I gazed out at our land as twilight deepened. Somewhere out there, beyond our property, people were still talking, still speculating, still searching for the mysterious figure who had orchestrated Clay's downfall. Let them wonder. Let them search. They would find nothing. I had learned long ago in dusty war rooms and on midnight missions that true power often lay in anonymity. The most effective operations were the ones that left no trace of their architects. Victory wasn't about recognition. It was about results. Carla's breathing had deepened, her body growing heavy against mine as she drifted toward sleep. I adjusted my arm around her, careful not to wake her. This peace, this quiet moment with my daughter was the only reward I had ever wanted. Not headlines, not fame, not even acknowledgement. Just this: her safety, her happiness, her trust. The phone on the table lit up again. Without looking at it, I reached over and turned it face down once more. Whatever it was, it could wait. Or better yet, it could fade away entirely, forgotten like yesterday's news. Some battles were meant to be fought in the open with banners flying and trumpets blaring, but others, the ones that mattered most, were won in silence, with no name attached to the victory. I had made my choice: peace over recognition, anonymity over acclaim, family over everything. Carla stirred slightly, murmuring something in her sleep. I held her closer, listening to the sounds of the evening: crickets beginning their nightly chorus, a distant owl, the gentle creak of the porch swing. This was enough. This was everything. I stretched my legs on the weathered boards of the porch as the swing gently rocked. The day had mellowed into that golden hour when everything seems to glow from within. Carla had been quiet for a while, just watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Can we go to the beach tomorrow?" she asked suddenly, looking up at me with those earnest eyes. "Sure thing, kiddo." I smiled down at her. Any special reason? She shrugged, that casual little movement that always reminded me how quickly she was growing up. I just want to feel the water on my toes. Simple pleasures. That's what we were rebuilding our life around now. Not revenge, not justice, though we'd found both, but the quiet moments that made a life worth living. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, Carla climbed into my lap without a word. It wasn't something she did as often anymore. 8-year-olds have their pride. But tonight, she curled against my chest like she used to when she was smaller. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her slight weight settle against me. "I love my new hair," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sound of waves crashing on the shore. My throat tightened. 3 weeks had passed since that day at the salon, when the stylist had worked magic with what remained of Carla's hair. The woman had taken one look at my daughter's uneven, damaged scalp and promised to create something beautiful. And she had. The short, natural style framed Carla's face perfectly, highlighting her eyes and the gentle curve of her cheekbones. But more importantly, it had given her back her confidence, her sense of self. "It suits you," I said, running my hand gently over the soft curls. "Strong and beautiful, just like you." She nestled closer, her small fingers playing with the button on my shirt. "Ms. Rodriguez asked if I wanted to be in the school picture next week." "And what did you say?" I said yes. There was quiet pride in her voice. "I wasn't sure before, but now I want to." I closed my eyes briefly, fighting the emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. 6 weeks ago, Carla had hidden in her room, refusing to look in mirrors, covering her head with hats and scarves. Now she wanted to be in a photograph that would hang in the school hallway for years to come. That was victory. Not Clay's public disgrace, not the school board's dissolution, not even the policy changes that had rippled through the district. This, my daughter reclaiming her dignity, her willingness to be seen, this was what I had fought for. "I'm proud of you," I told her, meaning every word. The twilight deepened around us, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Down the hill, beyond the trees that surrounded our property, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm against the shore. The sound had become the backdrop to our healing, constant, powerful, yet somehow soothing. "Dad?" Carla's voice was drowsy now. Are you still a ghost?" The question caught me off guard. Ghost Hammer, my old call sign, my identity for so many years. The man who appeared and disappeared without a trace, who struck with precision and vanished before the dust settled. "No," I said after a moment. "Not anymore." She nodded against my chest, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Good. I like you better as just Dad." Just Dad. No medals on my chest. No acknowledgement from the powers that had fallen. No public recognition for the man who had orchestrated it all. And that was exactly as it should be. In my former life, success had been measured in completed objectives, in threats neutralized, in missions accomplished without attribution. This wasn't so different, really. The goal had been clear: protect Carla, restore her dignity, ensure no other child would suffer the same fate. All had been achieved. The recognition I truly valued came in moments like this. My daughter's trust, her healing, her arms wrapped around my neck as she drifted toward sleep. "Look," I whispered, pointing to the first bright evening star. "Make a wish." She squinted up at the sky, her expression serious as she considered. Then she closed her eyes tight, her lips moving silently. "What did you wish for?" I asked when she opened them again. "Can't tell," she said with the first hint of mischief I'd seen in weeks. "Or it won't come true." I chuckled, the sound rumbling in my chest where her ear was pressed. Fair enough. The night air had cooled, carrying the salt scent of the ocean. Tomorrow we would walk along that shore together, feel the sand between our toes, maybe build a castle or hunt for shells. Normal things. Father and daughter things. "I think," Carla said slowly, fighting to keep her eyes open, "that everything's going to be okay now." "It is," I promised her. "It already is." She nodded, satisfied, and let her eyes close fully. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened and evened out, her body growing heavy against mine as sleep claimed her. I sat there holding her long after the stars had fully emerged, a blanket of light above us. The mission wall in my office was empty now, all evidence of our operation destroyed or encrypted beyond recovery. The burner phones were gone, the surveillance equipment returned to storage. Olga had disappeared back into her digital world, our connection maintained only through encrypted channels that would activate if ever needed again. To the world, what had happened was simple. A corrupt system had been exposed by anonymous sources. Justice had prevailed. Reforms had been implemented. End of story. No one needed to know about the father who had once been Ghosthammer, who had applied decades of tactical expertise to bring down those who had hurt his daughter. No one needed to know about the nights spent planning, the risks taken, the lines crossed. All that mattered was this: Carla sleeping peacefully in my arms, her new hair catching the moonlight, her dignity restored. I carefully stood, cradling her against my chest as I had when she was a baby. She barely stirred as I carried her inside and up to her bedroom. The walls, once bare, were now covered with her artwork again. Bright, hopeful scenes of beaches and forests and family. As I tucked her in, she murmured something in her sleep that sounded like, "Love you." "Love you too, kiddo," I whispered back. "Always." I stood in the doorway watching her for a moment longer, then quietly closed the door. Outside, the waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore. Tomorrow, we would stand together at the edge of that vast ocean, letting the water wash over our feet, building something new on the clean, wet sand. No medals, no thanks. Just a father protecting his child. It was enough. It was no medals, no thanks. Just a father protecting his child. It was enough. It was everything.